Western civilization, ancient Greece. I'm going to fly through this. Literature, religion, philosophy, and politics. First, we have Homer, the epic poet. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the most famous books of all time. The Iliad deals with Helen of Troy, who was the most beautiful woman in the world. She was the face that launched 1,000 ships. She was stolen by the Prince of Troy. You can't really see this, but there's the ancient Greek language. The beginning is, O sing me muse of the wrath of Achilles. Achilles was a great warrior, perhaps the greatest of all time. His mom picked him up by his Achilles tendon and dipped him in the invincibility fluid. And the saying goes that he was invincible, but if he got stabbed in the Achilles heel, then he would be vulnerable. So the idea of an Achilles heel comes from this. Odysseus brought about the fall of Troy by using the Trojan horse, and that's a big fake horse that they left. They couldn't breach the walls of Troy, so they filled this horse with soldiers. And in the night, after they had had a great celebration, the soldiers snuck out, killed the guards, and Troy fell. The Odyssey was about Odysseus' way home. Odysseus was a brilliant guy. He was known for being a trickster. He was also a warrior, but he wasn't nearly as good a warrior as Achilles. So Achilles is the main character of the Iliad. Odysseus is in the Iliad, and then he gets his own book called the Odyssey. Iliad refers to Troy, which was called Ilia. All right. So he is here in Troy, and he wants to get home to Ithaca, but in the process, he ends up going all over the place, right? This is definitely not Ithaca. Ithaca is over here still in Greece, right here, right? But he gets blown way off course. Why does he have such a hard problem? Because he has a famous run-in with the Cyclops, in which he sneaks all his men out on the back of sheep, and they... on the way out, he's so pleased with himself. He had blinded the Cyclops by stabbing him in the eye. And on the way out, he's so pleased with himself that after he convinces the Cyclops that his name is No Man. He says, no man has blinded me, is what the Cyclops says to all his Cyclops friends. They all laugh at him because he's kind of a stupid Cyclops on the Cyclops Island. And he says... no man has blinded me, but he's flying away in his ship, and he says, hey, Mr. Cyclops, by the way, it's not no man who's blinded you, it is I, Odysseus, the smartest guy in the world. And then the blind Cyclops, who doesn't know who he is, couldn't have identified him. Before he throws his last rock, he goes, Odysseus, yeah. I'll tell my dad about you. My dad just happens to be Poseidon, the god of the ocean. There's a whole lot of ocean in between you and your home, and we'll see how well you do against my dad, Poseidon. So this is an example of hubris. And hubris is the idea, common in Greek tragedy, that somebody has aspirations of greatness. They want to be great. They want to be so great that they touch the sun. They want to be so great that they are gods, but they're just human beings. And this tragic flaw, usually arrogance, will get somebody killed. So the word hubris goes around in Western culture a lot, and it means that you're so arrogant that you have an arrogance that will bring you down. This right here is Icarus and his father, Daedalus. I think Daedalus is the architect of the labyrinth that they put the Minotaur in, but I'm not sure of that. So his son, Icarus, is flying too close to the sun. His son is flying too close to the sun. There's the sun. And his wings are made of wax and feathers from the birds, but the sun is so strong that it starts to cook the wax. And his dad says, don't fly too high, son. We got to, get off this island, get back to the mainland, and live a nice life. But Icarus, of course, won't listen. He flies higher and higher and higher. The sun melts his wings, and the sun, S-O-N, ends up in the ocean. Father has to watch it happen. So there's a lot to this story. It's been very famous, this story of Icarus and his wax wings. Tragic arrogance is a nice way to call hubris, because it occurs in Greek tragedy. So on his way home, this is also very hubristic. Odysseus encounters the sirens. The sirens are beautiful women with beautiful singing voices, and they will famously wreck somebody on their shores, because you're cruising around and there's a lot of islands out here. There's like 1 million islands out here. Not really 1 million, but many. So many that they're rather uncountable. And some of them are good for a ship to land. Some of them are bad for a ship to land. And sometimes this island will be so beautiful you want to go there, but there are rocks underneath that'll tear your ship apart, and you don't know that. So famously, the sirens would sing so beautifully that they would get these sailors to come and wreck their ship on the shores. But their song was so captivating. Here's another version of it where they're birds. Their song was so captivating that people couldn't possibly avoid it. So you see in both of these paintings, Odysseus, this is Odysseus the captain. He's not a prisoner. He's actually been tied up. He ordered his men to tie him up, and then he gets wax and sticks the wax in their ears. See how these guys don't care? And he says, no matter what I say, no matter what I do, don't take the wax out of your ears and just keep rowing straight on. So these guys just cruise on, and they don't pay any attention to the siren's song. See, this one's right up in his face, but he's not paying any attention. He's just straight on, banging through his work, practicing 4 hours a day. And here you have Odysseus, who is the sensory, the knower, and he is just wrapped up in feeling the sensation of a song where you know you're going to kill yourself, but you do it anyway. And he's the captain of the ship, so if he was able to get himself down, he would. Look at this face, too. If he was able to get himself down, he would get himself down and get himself killed. So this is a really awesome metaphor for something like addiction. And it's also a really awesome metaphor for discipline, where you will give yourself a schedule and you say, no, I'm going to tie all my emotions up. I'll let myself experience the beauty, but I'm going to tie up my work so that I stay at work, so that I work hard, and that my whole boat doesn't drift off chasing after the sirens and crash on the rocks just because I want immediate sensory pleasure. So that's a very beautiful, story that's been around forever. So while Odysseus is out having these beautiful experiences, what is his wife Penelope doing? She is a famous symbol of fidelity. And for 20 years, she is being jeeped by all these guys who are on the island. And they said, hey, everybody's back from the war already. Remember, Odysseus is out there on the sea forever because he made the god of the sea angry. So she's constantly weaving this garment to mourn. She says, I will date one of you. You just wait. I have to weave my mourning shroud. So she weaves all day, every day. These guys are in Odysseus's house drinking his wine, hoping that his wife will marry them. And every day she's weaving, and every night she undoes the weaving, waiting for him for 20 years. When Odysseus finally comes back, she doesn't know who he is. He has a great mighty beard. He's 20 years older. He's not looking so good because he's been at sea for so long, and she's not going to believe he is who he is. She'll probably have the guards kill him. So he shows up to claim his magic bow, which only he can string. Put the string on, and he strings the bow and then proceeds to kill everybody who is trying to marry his wife. The battle goes on for a long time. It looks like Odysseus and his still few remaining friends are going to lose. And then Athena joins, and you can't mess with Athena. There are many gods and goddesses in ancient Greece. Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom. She famously loves Odysseus because he is a tricky warrior. Okay, so that's epic poetry, and this is tragedy and comedy. One of the famous comedies is about our boy Socrates, who we'll talk about in a minute here, and it's called Aristophanes. Aristophanes is the poet, and The Clouds is the poem, and it's about Socrates doing philosophy, and it just makes fun of him. So there are a lot of bad rumors going around Athens about Socrates, and this play basically just makes fun of him. And later we'll see that he has to defend himself against this play because a lot of people have seen it. It was very popular, and a lot of people hated Socrates, and their hatred took the shape of this comedy, much in the way that a lot of political hatred today will take the shape of comedy. Tragedy would be one like Sophocles is the great tragedian. He wrote a famous one called Oedipus the King. The oracle said that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother. So of course, his father, being the king, is like, no, I'm not having any of this. Takes the baby, says, take this baby away and kill it. I believe the oracle, and I don't want to die. And, nobody likes this. So of course the servant has a tender heart and cannot kill the baby, because who wants to kill a baby? Come on, only crazy people. So Oedipus ends up floating down the river. He is a very ambitious fellow. He ends up becoming a really great man. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and he, which was in the class before, and he becomes king in his town. One day he's on the road. He gets in an argument with an older man. You move your car. No, you move your car. Ends up killing him. Later, he meets a beautiful older woman, and he's like, oh, you're lovely. I feel some great connection to you. They end up getting married. He has children, lives a nice life, but there's always something bothering him. So he ends up going to see this oracle, and the oracle tells him pretty much what's going on. At some point, he finds out that, yes, he indeed did kill his father, and he indeed did marry his mother. And when he sees his children, he tears out his own eyes. The Bacchae is a story about Dionysius, or Bacchus, who is the god of the grape harvest, winemaking, wine, ritual madness, fertility, theater, and religious ecstasy. Very beautiful things. Ecstasy means standing outside of yourself. So when he is asserting himself as a new god, he ends up possessing all the women of the town, and they run around and rip people apart who oppose him. It's just a really amazing story about a god asserting himself for the first time, because, of course, there are many gods. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a good friend of Wagner and then ended up hating Wagner, wrote a whole book about not liking Wagner. His first book, when he became a full professor at the age of, I think he was 24 or something, in Germany about 120, 130 years ago, maybe longer, maybe 200 years ago. I don't know. I haven't had coffee yet. I'm just saying dates. You can look these up. But Nietzsche, we could talk about for 6 months and never be tired. But his first book was called The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music. And he had these two forces. And the forces were the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian is restrictive order, and the Dionysian is creative chaos. So you have this insane element to art that is necessary in order to give it some life. But then the Apollonian gives you order. And this was the dichotomy that he's going back and forth about. And Apollo is the sun god. He's also the god of number and measurement. So this is kind of a dichotomy of having creative chaos, like improvising, like jazz, freedom, but you have to have that freedom occurring within a context. You have to know when the improvisation is going to take place. And it's nice to have a main part to go back to that's in time and predictable. Okay, so if we look here, we can see the Apollonian and Dionysian. The Dionysian is the religious ecstasy, the feeling of being overcome by this art, being overcome by the power of this song that's going to make you want to wreck your boat on the rocks. But at the same time, you have your Apollonian, your 4 hours of practice every day at least, of these people rowing in a straight line towards a goal. You can't have one without the other. You need the Apollonian and the Dionysian, restrictive order versus creative chaos. One shall not win. It is the interplay between the two that makes art beautiful. Ancient Greek religion is polytheistic. They lived on Mount Olympus. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were the first three most important, Poseidon being the god of the ocean, Zeus taking care of the sky, the heavens, and Hades, the underworld. Other notable goddesses, we have Hera, the wife of Zeus, usually very upset with Zeus for doing things like impersonating somebody's husband and then making a demigod. Hercules, I believe, was one such demigod who was always beset by Hera, because, that's the son from another union. Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest. She's in the new American Gods. If that ever comes back, she will open the season as a main bad guy. Apollo, we talked about, the god of the sun, and Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom. She is the patron goddess of Athens. Apollo was the patron god of Troy. Great. Prometheus is another notable god. He gave human beings fire, and he was rewarded for this by being immortal and having this beautiful bird here eat his liver every day. He's tied to a post being destroyed constantly. That's what he gets for giving humans fire, giving humans power over nature. Narcissus is another wonderful one. Here he is, being in love with his own image. Narcissism is the problem. Narcissus is the god. Narcissist is what you call a person who has an excessive interest or admiration of themselves. And this is supposed to be animated, but bear with me here. Want to do it? Let's do it. Freud likes to say, if you like the way you look that much, darling, you should go and love yourself. And that's basically what it means. It means not just that you love yourself in a way that is, wholesome and wonderful and you want the best for yourself. It means that you love yourself in the way that one would love a lover. Like, you are like, oh, my fan, I love my fan, I love my girlfriend. You love yourself in the way that you would or should love another person the most, right? This is Tirak, the location of my love is here. I love myself. Sisyphus is another one who's awesome. He cheated death with his great wisdom, and he was rewarded for his great wisdom by being immortal, and he has to use his immortality by pushing this rock up a mountain for all of time. And when he gets to the top of the mountain, the rock will roll back down the other side. He will go back down, pick up the rock, and push the rock up the mountain. Sisyphus is somebody who is very constantly used throughout Western civilization. So these are just a few gods that sort of shape the way the Western mind works. Greek thought is, in a lot of ways, Western thought. And a lot of our best ideas come from there. We haven't thought of a lot of new stuff recently, apart from the internet and Instagram and K-pop. Well, K-pop maybe isn't Western. Euclid came up with Euclidean geometry. Every time you do geometry, think of the Greeks. Pythagoras gave us that wonderful theorem. It's like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I believe is what it is. And that will always tell you the angles of a triangle that has at least one right angle in it. But math was more than just a game for him. Math was the base of reality. In the way that a lot of people thought that fire was the primary element or things like that, he thought that math was the base of reality. So if we're in a simulation, Pythagoras found it first. He had a math cult. If you look up a video called Donald Duck in Math Magic Land, you will see a nice little run through of Pythagoras's math cult. These modes, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian modes came from the Greek. Before there was a keyboard, these were written in Greek music and ancient Greek philosophy. What is philosophy? Philosophy means love or pursuit, and like hydrophilic means move towards water. Sophia means wisdom, so philosophy is the love and pursuit of wisdom. Branches of philosophy. Epistemology, how do we know what we know? What is knowledge? And that's a really deep question that we could talk about forever. Aesthetics, what is art? And we'll do this like this. Come on, you. No, yeah. So aesthetics, the question really more is like, why is art? All human beings, all human cultures have created art. Why do we create art? Why is it significant to us? Why is it the way it is? Ethics, what is the right thing to do? Metaphysics, what would that mean? That would mean like, what is physics? Physics basically in Greek, physis means nature. So meta means above. Metaphysics would mean what is beyond nature. So something like a ghost would be metaphysical for sure. Something like love would be metaphysical because you can't really prove that it exists or not, but it's something that is very real, more real than the way this mouse that I'm clicking. You know, this is something real. I could show it to another person. Look at this mouse. But it's definitely less real than love. God would be something similar to people who believe in God. Truth with a capital T, universal truth, would be something metaphysical. And a fun one would be something like a ghost. A ghost would be something metaphysical because it exists in a realm where you're like, can you see that person over there? No, I can't see him. Well, I can only see him. Maybe it's a metaphysical being. Maybe you're crazy. Who knows? So metaphysics tries to reach into what is beyond nature. A lot of people dismiss metaphysics. They hate it because it's very difficult to prove things like the existence of God, like the existence of love. Normally, people will take love apart into its constituent elements and say that it's nothing more than chemicals. But I think that that's cynical. There is a beyond nature. You can say that science hasn't found it yet, but a lot of people think that science is everything, and science has found everything. So one metaphysical question is, what is the all of everything? What is it all made of? And no, yeah. This can't be full screen. What is the all of everything? What is it all made of? Whatever. I'm going to cut it. See what happens when you watch me learn how to do this? What is the all of everything? They found the atom, and the atom means unsplittable, as we will see later. The atom is indeed splittable. Nuclear weapons and nuclear power come from the fact that the atom is splittable. What is the all of everything? What is everything made of? Heraclitus said that everything is in motion constantly. This is familiar if you're Buddhist because you have the idea that everything is moving all the time. Parmenides would be more like Advaita Vedanta, stillness. Everything is There is no motion. Everything is exactly as it is, and time is an illusion. Heraclitus says famously, you can't step into the same river twice. Why? Because the river is always moving. Parmenides would say there is no movement. And these kinds of questions were not super interesting to Socrates, who is more interested in ethics. Eudaimonia, the good life. How am I supposed to live? His method was the Socratic method, and it involved asking questions. The oracle at Delphi gave him the pronouncement. This is the same oracle that told Oedipus that he was going to kill his father and marry his mother. The oracle said, there is no one wiser than Socrates, right? And he said, I don't believe you. So the Socratic method is about questions. He thought this was a challenge from God, so he went on a mission to try to find somebody wiser than him. He thought that this was a question. So he went around and he would famously ask people, he would find a doctor and he would ask them questions about the heart, questions about the brain, questions about the lungs and how these things worked. And he would be like, this is crazy. I can't be the wisest man in the world. This doctor knows all kinds of things. And then he would start to ask him questions of politics. How should we run the country? The doctor would start saying crazy things. And he'd say, this doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. But he pretends to know what he's talking about. Socrates repeated this method with all sorts of wise people, and he found that everyone was willing to offer information that they were pretending was true, but it wasn't actually true. It was nonsense. But they didn't know that it was nonsense. They didn't know that they were talking, about things that they didn't know at all. And Socrates always knew the limits of his wisdom. And he always felt like he was stupid, and he always proceeded, no, I don't know what wisdom is. Tell me what wisdom is. I don't know what justice is. Tell me what justice is. I don't know what good is. Tell me what good is. I don't know what love is. Tell me what love is. And then other people would tell him, and he'd be like, that's not true. He liked tearing apart other people's arguments. He could see why everybody else was wrong. But he didn't make a lot of positive statements. He was always questioning. He was always wondering. And he was always astonished by learning. But he was always sure that he was ignorant. He always knew that he was ignorant. This mission, however, got him killed. It eventually got him killed because he was going around irritating everybody. Nobody wants to be told constantly, well, look, see how you're wrong? See how you're stupid? Let's try to find the truth together. What is truth? Let's try. Well, I think truth is pure justified reason. If you have a justification for it, then it's true. Well, what about suicide bombers? Right? You can throw anything out. And he was a big fan of throwing everything out. So Plato was the author of all of Socrates' books. Socrates was a character in Plato's books. We're pretty sure that he lived. Socrates speaks, argues, and teaches. The Apology was an account of his death, pretty much. He gets brought in. Here's his death. Famous painting. Before he dies, he has to say, he has to make an apology, but his apology is not an apology the way that you would think an apology would be. His apology is an explanation for his life. He goes, okay, I'm going to apologize. And the Greek word apology means I'm going to explain myself. And he says, you guys think that I'm a sophist. And a sophist means somebody who just makes up arguments. There were a lot of people around these times that would teach the wealthy sons how to win arguments. You come, have your kids study with me. If anyone argues with him, I will teach them tactics to win arguments. Socrates was wary of these. That's why he was always ripping things apart. So he said, I know that you think I'm just a sophist. I'm not a sophist. So when people say words like sophistry is like the art of being a sophist. And it usually means that you're using words to make nonsense sound like it's true. They make the true things. They make the weaker argument appear stronger. And that was in Aristophanes' The Clouds. Socrates makes the weaker argument appear stronger. And it's easy to do that. But he said he was not doing this. He was searching after truth. So they tried to get him to leave Athens. He says, just stop doing philosophy. I will never stop doing philosophy. Just leave then, run away. We'll leave the door open. Here's the key. He wouldn't do it. He was intent to die. And what were the charges? The charges were corrupting the youth and impiety. Impiety means disrespect to the gods. Corrupting the youth, he says, well, if I am making them question and making them do philosophy and making them purify their souls, this is great. Of course, I am making the youth better. I'm making them better. They're not fun to you because they're asking too many questions, but that's because you're an idiot. And this is basically what he told the jury. Impiety. He was disrespecting the gods. He says, I never disrespect the gods. The oracle told me no one is wiser than me. So I went on this mission to try to find somebody wiser than me. My whole life I have dedicated to this. Look at my wife. She's tired of me going out and doing all these things all the time. And his wife had to be really tolerant of him because he's something like 80 years old, out drinking wine, talking about love with his compatriots. And he was not very interested in making money or getting a big house, but everybody loved Socrates. He was a wandering barefoot teacher. History loves them. Plato was his author. He was also his student. He watched his father figure here was executed by the state. His influences are Socrates, Parmenides, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, all of these guys we've talked about. He influenced virtually all subsequent Western philosophy. I cut and pasted these out of Wikipedia. I really thought that was cool. Some of his thought experiments are the Ring of Gyges, which is an ethical experiment, and the Allegory of the Cave, which is metaphysical sort of thought experiment. And then also epistemology, the Allegory of the Cave. So here's Schmiegel.
Yes, the Ring of Gyges. Anyone would be corrupted by such power.
So here's the ring, and the ring will turn you invisible. And his argument is that anybody that could have the power to turn invisible would definitely rob a bank. They would definitely do things that they can get away with because they would have great power. So his idea was great power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is the reverse of Spider-Man's. With great power comes great responsibility. The Allegory of the Cave was really cool because it was kind of like the Matrix. He thought that most human beings were like prisoners that are tied up and there are shadows being cast on the wall. Now up here there's a roadway where there are performers holding these things up like Nang Talung. And we only see the shadows. We don't see the real things. So there's a fire and there's a shadow play on the wall. And we're tied up. We can't turn around and look at these things. So the world as it comes in through the senses is like this. It's not truth. We're seeing a reflection of this real thing. His idea is about the forms. The forms are the truth through which phenomena, things we see, are projected from the world of forms. And we know this isn't the world of forms, right? The world of forms would be up there, something like heaven. And in heaven there is perfection. Here on earth there is no perfection, because here on earth there is impermanence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? That's what this world is. But he said that there is a soul, and that soul goes up to heaven, and it will know the forms, and it will come back here into this imperfect world. But it remembers the perfection of the previous world. So Socrates believed, all these Greeks believed in reincarnation, or at least that was kind of the idea going around back then. Westerners don't believe in that now, usually. Abrahamic religions don't teach reincarnation, but ancient Westerners did believe in reincarnation, maybe in another life. So this Allegory of the Cave is really similar to something like virtual reality, where you put this thing on your head, and if a monster is coming from the side, you jump, and you hear the sound in your right ear, and you turn that way, and then it's in both ears. So Plato imagined a world in which you have sensory input coming in, you're constantly reacting to it, but that input is not actually real. People have been thinking about this for thousands of years, but this is the beginning of it in Western civilization. In Western civilization, we have a really good example of the questioning of reality. So this brings us to the question of what is true. Very metaphysical question or epistemological question. So the truth of the test is an answer key, right? You just write down the right thing, you get a good grade. The truth of capitalism is money. If you have a lot of money, you have a lot of power within the systems of capitalism, which are, they rule almost everything. This is a very strong truth. The truth of science is in results. If you do tests and then the results come in, you can say, this is true because I have tested it, and I have tested it in a way that other people should be able to test it also. If you use this medicine, this disease will go away. Almost all the time. Not all the time, but almost all the time. Look at my results. That's a pretty powerful truth. The truth of virtual reality comes from belief. The idea that your senses see things and that those things are somewhat real and you will regard them as if they are real. Plato was against relativism, especially, not especially ethical relativism, but relativism basically means that there are many truths. Are you a relativist? You can decide. This is a quote from David Mitchell, Cloud Atlas, beautiful movie. As many truths as men, occasionally I glimpse a truer truth hiding in imperfect simulacrums of itself. But as I approach, it bestirs itself and moves deeper into the thorny swamp of dissent. As many truths as men. So that's what relativism would be. It would be, you have your truth, I have my truth. I love Justin Bieber, and I think he's the greatest musician that ever walked the face of the earth. You think that Mozart is the greatest musician that ever walked the face of the earth. We can argue about it all day, but I have my truth and you have your truth. If you look at ethics, some people believe that women should never be allowed to read or write, that you shouldn't be taught to read or write because of whatever, and other people might believe in equality, and they can argue all day, every day, forever, and some people walk away and say, you have your truth, I have my truth. This quote is cool because he says, occasionally, sometimes, I glimpse a truer truth hiding in imperfect simulacrums of itself. It's a truth that's truer than these truths that everybody's walking around with, and it's hiding in fake copies. And as I approach, it bestirs itself and moves deeper into the thorny swamp of dissent. So as I get closer to this truth that's truer than normal truth, it hides from me. Whenever I try to get close to it, it hides from me. It will always run away. So this is the problem of metaphysics, right? When you try to capture it in language, you can't do it. And this is why when monks try to teach the Dhamma, they can't really do it. They'll usually just tell you, you have to practice. You have to find this inside of yourself. You're not going to hear words coming out of my mouth and then get truth. It doesn't work that way. Truth constructed of lies. So relativism, you can look it up, but people hate it. I might hate it. There's this idea of higher pleasures, and I brought this into the Greek part because it has Socrates in it. And the higher pleasures are what you think they would be. They are going to the orchestra, eating fine foods that are also very healthy for you, that were grown in sustainable, soil with no poison in it, and the workers were paid well while they were making it. And as I'm eating this, I'm just thinking, man, everything about this is good. The animal that I'm eating lived a good life and walked around. They had one bad day when they were killed. This is just wonderful. This is all really good. And then you have lower pleasures. Lower pleasures would be like Kentucky Fried Chicken, where they famously make these mutant animals that they torture every last cent out of. And the lowest of music, like music that's just a commercial for music. It's just constantly just blasting sounds that are going to make you pay attention all the time, make your body feel these things. Because for the Greeks, the body is bad, and the feelings of the body are lower. And the mind contains reason, and reason is the way that we know truth. Truth does not come in through the senses. Truth comes in through reason. And reason, unfortunately, has to work with the senses, but it has to use wisdom in order to do that. So the quote is, "It's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the pig or the fool is of a different opinion, it is only because they only know their side of the question. If you think that KFC is the best, it's because you've never tasted the good stuff. If you think that this bad music is the best, it's because you can't understand what's happening in the orchestra hall. You can't know the theater." John Stuart Mill, father of utilitarianism. So what is aesthetics? Aesthetics comes from the Greek aesthesis, which means perceptible by the senses. Anesthetic makes you unable to feel. Aesthetic as an adjective basically means how something affects your senses. You can call something, say something has a nice aesthetic. I like the aesthetic of this coffee shop. I like how it touches my senses. I don't buy Mac computers for their aesthetic value. I buy them for their processing power. So I want my tool to work. I don't care what it looks like. So the senses lie. You can look this up. Eddie Murphy falling down the steps. I'm not going to wreck my thing. Are these lines parallel? Yes, they look like they're not. Are these lines equal? Yes, they look like they're not. The senses lie. Reason finds truth, and they believe that through language, through dialogue, we can learn from each other and find truth together. So speech is somewhat sacred to the ancient Greeks, and we are very happy as Westerners with, especially as Americans, freedom of speech is important. We want to be able to argue about every single thing. Freedom of speech gets carried to a very interesting conclusion with something like South Park. If you watch South Park, there was a cartoon that made fun of everything, even the most offensive things, even sacred things. South Park would make fun of all of it, and nothing was ever sacred. Freedom of speech went carried to its complete and total apotheosis, like its point at which nothing can come back from. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about freedom of speech and freedom of dialogue. Through dialogue, we can learn truth from each other, and we can find truth together. The world of Plato and Socrates, mind-body dualism. The mind is separate from the body, or the soul, rather. They call it the soul in the body, and the soul can leave the body, come back. So he was not really too worried about dying. This is a picture of him about to drink the hemlock. They believed in the immortality of the soul. They believed in that the soul was not impermanent, it was permanent. It is going somewhere. This is something that endures in Western culture. It's something that we have in Christianity. They believed in reincarnation. They believed in the forms, which are perfect copies of things that will happen in reality, but they're only a copy of a copy. And art is even worse because it's just a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. I drew in class, but I won't draw now. Some of the forms are like the beautiful. We can see beauty, we can see a beautiful person, but that person isn't perfect. The beautiful is in heaven, and it comes down. Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, she's still going to die someday, and then she will rot and be a skeleton, right? So she's not perfect. No one's perfect. Perfect is up there. The good. You can be as good as you possibly want to be. You can adhere to justice as much as possible, but true good is something that we can't see happen here. So you have the idea of the forms versus the particulars. Particulars is basically like stuff that happens in the real world, and the forms are the perfect things that happen up there in the world that we don't pay any attention, the world that we don't pay any attention to. But you can sort of see a glimpse of this if you use reason. If you see without your senses, you see with reason. You can start to see the truth in the forms. You can start to see the truth that's in the symbols around you. Mimesis was Plato's rather negative view of art as a copy of a copy that we get in the Republic. And The Republic is a book about building a perfect society. I'll go through this quickly. The Ring of Gyges is in there. It's based on, society is based on mutual need and difference of aptitude. We're all different people and we need each other. He believed in philosopher kings that should rule the world, guardians who should protect, and the producers and merchants should produce things and make things. And that's the best way to make a perfect society. This isn't a global society, of course, because that wasn't possible back then. But what you see now, yeah, I'll just roll through. You have philosopher kings who would own no property. You have the guardians that would have some property. And then you would have the producers and merchants. They could become very wealthy, but they would have no power. So here we go. Philosopher kings own no property. They would have no family, and they would have all of the political power. They would be the wisest people, but they would not be rich, and they would not pass this on to their sons, and they would have all the political power, like the Jedi Council. The Guardians were warriors, and they would have some authority too, but you don't want the military controlling things. Producers and merchants could own property, but they could have no political power, because you don't want that, because that's the world that we have now, isn't it? Hopefully we can do this. So this all sounds great. But Plato and Socrates were advocating censorship of art. They wanted to censor art because some art is just too hardcore for people. In book 2 and 3, part 3 of book 2, he's talking about education. And he says that the minds of young people and also stupid people can't really be understanding these stories about gods doing things that are bad. They want gods to be high moral exemplars. So all this literature that we talked about involves a bunch of people doing bad things because that's what's entertaining. So the question is, what happens between truth and fiction? Can fiction have truth? So the censorship has to happen because it creates moral weakness. That's what Socrates is telling us. He wants art to teach. We must censor poetry because, 1, it's not true, and 2, it encourages moral weakness. Young people or stupid people would become bad if their minds consume this poetry. Only wise people can use this kind of media. That's the subtext. If you're wise, you know what's going on, and you're not going to wreck your life because you're watching too much of this drama and then you want to be dramatic in your real life, or worse, violent. So he has a lot of formal requirements. He doesn't like the idea of particularly military people representing weak people. They can recognize weak people, that's good, but they don't want them to pretend to be weak, because you never know. The Spartans could invade at any moment, and you have to have a strong military who will fight against them. Talks a lot about the musical requirements, the right style for the right story. Lydian modes are good for mournful pieces, Ionian for relaxing. Dorian and Phrygian will inspire courage and self-control. In this way, art was a lot like propaganda. You were trying to create people who would be the best possible people. And we do this with our own art. We try to use like heavy metal or rock and roll or something like that, or like some hip hop with a good beat to get you motivated while you're doing your exercise. Maybe you have some chill stuff at the end of the night to try to relax. If you want your baby to stop crying, you sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. These pieces of music have jobs. They have purposes. So in the Republic, finally, the theory of art in book 10. Plato has been attacking the poets pretty hardcore in books 2 and 3. Why? It's because the ancient Greek people acted like these stories were super true, and they contained actually the highest truth. So this epic blind poet, Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, is constantly being quoted for things. How should we invade Carthage? Well, in the Odyssey, they did this and that and that and the other thing. And that's like saying, well, I saw this on TV, let's try it, And that works sometimes, but Homer was supposed to be an expert on a lot of things. And if you can use literature for a lot of things, but Plato was very upset about the things that people were using literature for, and he thought people were being stupid and they were making wrong decisions, so he wanted to kind of knock the poets off their high horse. Socrates, in his book 10, this theory of art, he explains that art objects are a mimesis of reality. It's just an echo of reality. He explains that they are, in fact, twice removed from reality. It's a copy of a copy, because remember, the forms are the true reality. The things we actually see are real objects, and then an art object would be a copy of a copy. Do you believe that? I don't. This one's a little bit better. Watch this video. Look up Diotima's ladder. The beautiful can be that perfect thing that only barely manifests itself in the world. That makes more sense. So Aristotle was a student of Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. Plato thinks that art should be good and teach, and Aristotle thinks that art should draw the evil out of you. Catharsis, if you look that up, is something where you watch something that's horrifying, and the horror of it helps you. The purging or release of emotional tensions, especially through kinds of art or music. It'll draw out the negative to relieve personal and societal tension. The sublime is another one we should check out, just not right now. So for Aristotle, we are capable of using lies to cobble together truth. We are able to use fictional stories in order to evoke a truth that's so deep that you couldn't ever say it in English, or I think in Thai. If you're reading the Buddhist texts in Pali or in Sanskrit, you realize that they're just words until you do them. And they're also evoking truth in a way that's not common to us right now. So you can speak words, but they're just words. There has to be a soul beneath it all. And fiction, for a lot of people, for me, it gets at the soul. So art, even though it's all lies, art can have a deeper truth than somebody writing you a paper about the nature of reality. Why is art? That's the question. Why do all people produce art? That's the question of aesthetics. Aristotle said philosophy was not a techne. A techne would be like a technique. Technes in music would be something like running scales really fast, stage performance, stage presence, being able to correct your mistakes very quickly, being able to fearlessly improvise, knowing a big repertoire. But beneath all of them, there's a soul of being a musician that can't be reduced to techniques. Philosophy is like that for him. There is science, and there is medicine, and there is epistemology and metaphysics, and even politics, all these things that you can argue about. What is justice? You can do these things, but philosophy is the deeper thing. If all of these sciences are a telescope, philosophy is the eye that sees through the upagon. Why do we want art to hurt? The Greeks believed that the mind is better than the body. The mind can understand truth through reason. Do you agree with them? Why or why not? Do you like the body, or do you like the mind? Do you think that the senses only lie? So Aristotle did everything, of course. Some people called him the philosopher. This is the Middle Ages philosophers who found his work. Virtue ethics and fictional truth are two major elements that I touch on in other classes. You probably have seen those. Alexander the Great was his student. He destroyed the Persians. He went all the way to India, and the troops said, Paulel, let's go home. He was a great military conqueror, but he was not so good at politics. His empire split up. Here's his empire first. There's his empire second, just remnants of it. The Ptolemaic dynasty was down here in Egypt. Cleopatra was from that. The empire of Alexander the Great is about that big. The Roman Empire is about that big. Here's a picture of Greece. Here's Leonidas, the famous Spartan king, throwing a spear at you. City-states, two most popular, the two most famous, the two most well-known, historically significant are Athens and Sparta. Athens is the cradle of Western civilization in a lot of ways. All of the great philosophers hung out here in togas and hung out. Democracy is often traced back to this place. It is a sacred city in the history of Western civilization. Sparta made incredible soldiers. They had a commitment to that. Every citizen was a warrior, and their warrior ethos is something that people still have a lot of respect for today. Greek society in general involved city-states which were decentralized, yet there was still a common culture. They were polytheistic, which means they have many gods. They were democratic, one person, one vote, as long as you're not a slave or a woman. And reason will give you truth. Question: is democracy a good thing? Green is more democratic, red is less democratic, according to that map. So, last thing, Twitter and the believers. When Twitter first came up with their trending topics, the top 10 things were the things that everybody was talking about. They wanted to know what everyone was talking about. And then they realized that the top 10 topics were all about Justin Bieber. So they changed away from democracy so that they could have more interesting trending topics. So even with these high-minded Silicon Valley people, they realize sometimes that democracy is not the best thing in the world, and democracy gives you Justin Bieber. So why did Socrates hate a democracy? What is a demagogue? Why would a demagogue be a bad leader? Did democracy kill Socrates? Yes. Discussion: is democracy a perfect ideal? Is the popular thing the best thing? Do people know what is the best? Do people want what is the best? How could democracy be improved? And can you think of something better? Last quote here. Winston Churchill, instrumental in the First World War and the Lord of England during the Second World War. Great hero to all Westerners. Not really. He's a controversial figure, but he is an often quoted hero. And he said, "Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." So democracy is great. Can we do better?